"Will you stay if I undress?" asked the Apache woman to the lonely rancher. The ranch sat far from any town, stretched across dry land where the wind carried more dust than sound. The man who lived there had learned to listen to that wind. It filled the empty spaces where voices used to be. Every morning he woke before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because sleep no longer held him for long. He moved through the house quietly, even though no one else lived there. Old habits stayed longer than people. His name was Daniel, though no one called it anymore. The nearest neighbor lived miles away, and the town was a long drive that Daniel rarely made. After his wife died years ago, the ranch became both his shelter and his prison. He worked the land, fed the animals, fixed broken fences, and spoke only when necessary. Silence became easier than conversation. Silence did not ask questions. The house still carried traces of another life. A faded photograph sat on a shelf near the window, its edges worn from being touched too often. Daniel no longer picked it up, but he never moved it either. Some things felt safer when left untouched. At night he ate simple meals and sat on the porch, watching the sky change colors. The sunsets were beautiful, but beauty did not always bring comfort. Sometimes it made loneliness sharper. That evening, a dust storm rolled in without warning. The sky turned dull and heavy, and the wind howled like it was searching for something lost. Daniel rushed to secure the barn doors and guide the horses into shelter. His movements were quick but careful. He knew this land well. It had taught him how easily things could be taken away. As the storm grew stronger, he noticed something unusual near the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was an animal bent low against the wind. Then it moved differently, slower, more uncertain. Daniel narrowed his eyes and stepped closer, shielding his face from the dust. It was a woman. She stood unsteady, wrapped in worn clothing that offered little protection from the storm. Her dark hair was pulled back, but loose strands whipped across her face. One arm was pressed tightly against her side, and when she looked up, her eyes held both fear and strength. She did not speak. She simply stood there as if unsure whether to run or fall. Daniel froze. Visitors were rare, and unexpected ones even more so. His first instinct was caution. Years alone had sharpened it, but something about the way she stood, clearly exhausted yet refusing to collapse, stirred something he had not felt in a long time. Concern. The wind pushed harder, forcing a decision. Daniel took a step forward and raised his voice just enough to be heard. He told her she could take shelter in the barn. His words were simple, his tone steady. He did not reach for her. He did not ask questions. He just opened the door and stepped aside. She hesitated. Trust did not come easily to her. It showed in the way her eyes scanned him, the land, the open space around them. Then another strong gust hit, and her strength seemed to give way. She nodded once and followed him inside. The barn smelled of hay and animals, warm compared to the storm outside. Daniel brought her a blanket and pointed to a chair. She sat slowly, wincing as she lowered herself. Only then did he notice the dark stain on her clothing. She was hurt, though not severely. Still, pain had clearly traveled with her for some time. Daniel fetched water and a small first aid kit he kept nearby. He placed them within her reach and stepped back, giving her space. He did not ask where she came from or why she was there. He remembered how it felt to be questioned when all you needed was rest. After a long moment, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. She thanked him. The way she spoke carried a rhythm different from his own, shaped by a life he did not know. She told him she was Apache and that her name was Lena. She said little else. Daniel nodded. He told her his name and said she could stay until the storm passed. His words were plain, but he meant them. He returned to his work, checking on the animals, though his attention kept drifting back to the barn corner where she sat. He could feel her presence, like a change in the air. When the storm finally eased, the sky darkened into night. Lena remained where she was, clearly unsure of what came next. Daniel offered her a simple meal and showed her the small room near the house where she could sleep if she wished. He explained the rules without sounding like rules. No pressure, no expectations. She listened closely, her expression guarded but thoughtful. Life had taught her to measure people by actions, not words. She agreed to stay the night. Inside the house, the silence felt different. It was no longer empty, just quiet. Daniel noticed how Lena moved carefully, as if every step required thought. She ate slowly, her eyes occasionally lifting to study him. He did not stare back. Respect came naturally to him, even now. They spoke little that night. A few shared sentences about the storm, the land, the long road. Enough to acknowledge each other without crossing into questions neither was ready to answer. When Lena went to rest, Daniel returned to the porch. He sat under the stars, aware of something shifting inside him. It was not hope, not yet. It was awareness. The understanding that even the most isolated lives could still touch another. That loneliness was not always permanent, just patient. Inside, Lena lay awake longer than she intended. The room was simple, clean, and safe. Safety was not something she trusted easily. Her past was filled with movement, loss, and the need to stay alert. Yet the ranch felt different. The man who owned it did not look at her like something to claim or solve. He looked at her like a person passing through his life, deserving of choice. As the night deepened, both lay awake under the same roof, carrying different histories, bound by a single moment of shelter. Neither knew that this meeting would change them. For now, it was enough that the storm had passed, and neither was alone. The land outside rested quietly, holding their silence without judgment, waiting to see what morning would bring. Morning came slowly to the ranch, not with noise but with light. The sun rose over the dry land, touching the fields and fences with a soft glow. Daniel was already awake. He always was. He stepped outside quietly, letting the cool air fill his lungs. For a moment, he forgot that someone else was under his roof. Then he remembered, and the thought stayed with him as he began his chores. He fed the animals, checked the water, and repaired a loose fence post. His hands moved on their own, trained by years of repetition. Yet his mind wandered. He wondered if Lena had slept well, if her injury had eased, if she would leave as soon as she felt strong enough. Part of him expected that. People passed through his land sometimes, but they never stayed. Still, this felt different, though he did not know why. Inside the house, Lena woke slowly. She lay still for a few moments, listening. The house was quiet, but not empty. She could hear movement outside, steady and familiar, like someone who belonged to the place. That sound brought a strange comfort. She sat up carefully, feeling a dull ache at her side, but nothing sharp. The pain was manageable. She had learned long ago how to live with discomfort. She looked around the room. Everything was simple and clean. There were no extra decorations, no signs of luxury. Just what was needed. It reminded her of places she had known as a child, before life became complicated. She stood and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, then stepped into the main room. Daniel noticed her in the doorway when he came back inside. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he greeted her and asked if she was feeling better. His voice was calm, without concern that felt heavy or unwanted. She nodded and thanked him again. Gratitude came easily to her, but trust did not. Still, she felt no reason to fear him. Daniel prepared a simple breakfast. Nothing special, just food to begin the day. He placed a plate in front of her and sat across the table, leaving enough space so she would not feel trapped. They ate in quiet, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that allowed thoughts to settle. After eating, Lena offered to help. Daniel hesitated at first. He did not want her to strain herself, but she insisted gently. Helping for her was a way to feel useful, to feel human. He showed her small tasks, nothing demanding. She moved carefully but with purpose. As the day passed, they worked side by side without many words. Sometimes she asked about the animals. Sometimes he answered with short stories about their habits. Slowly, the ranch began to feel less like a lonely place and more like shared ground. In the afternoon, they sat outside in the shade. The heat was strong, but the breeze helped. Lena finally spoke about where she came from, though she chose her words carefully. She talked about her people, about moving often, about learning to rely on herself. She did not speak of pain directly, but it lived between her sentences. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer advice. Listening was something he had learned the hard way. When she paused, he did not push her to continue. Respect mattered more than curiosity. When she finished, Daniel shared a little of his own story. He spoke of his wife, of the years they spent building the ranch together, and of the silence that followed her passing. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes carried weight. He did not speak of grief as a wound, but as a shadow that followed him everywhere. Lena understood that kind of shadow. She did not try to remove it. She only acknowledged it. Sometimes being seen was enough. As the sun lowered, Lena's injury began to ache more. Daniel noticed and suggested she rest. She agreed, though it was not easy for her to stop moving. Still, she trusted him enough to listen. That evening, as they sat by the door watching the sky change color, Lena asked him a question. Not about the ranch, not about the land. She asked why he lived so far from everyone else. Daniel thought for a long moment before answering. He said the land did not ask him to be anything he was not, that it allowed him to exist without explanation. He admitted that loneliness had become familiar, and familiar things were easier than uncertain ones. Lena nodded. She understood that too well. Night fell gently. They shared another quiet meal. The air felt heavier, filled with thoughts neither spoke aloud. Lena sensed something growing between them, not desire but awareness. She wondered how long it would last. People often left once they felt safe again. She wondered if she would do the same. When it was time to rest, she hesitated near the doorway. She thanked Daniel again, not just for shelter, but for kindness without conditions. He told her she was welcome for as long as she needed. His words were sincere, but he did not cling to her presence. Later, lying awake, Lena stared at the ceiling. Memories came and went, places she had stayed, people who had offered help with expectations attached. This felt different. That difference unsettled her. Outside, Daniel sat on the porch again. The stars were bright, unmoving. He realized that for the first time in years, the silence did not feel so heavy. It was shared, even if only for a short while. Neither of them knew what the next days would bring. But both sensed that something important had begun. Not a promise, not a solution, but a connection built slowly, carefully, like something fragile that deserved patience. The night held them both, separate yet connected, waiting quietly for what would come next. The next day began with a strange feeling for both of them. It was not tension, and it was not comfort either. It was something in between, like standing on unfamiliar ground and trying to decide whether it was safe to take another step. The morning was quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt aware. Daniel worked outside early, repairing an old gate that had been loose for years. He had ignored it before, telling himself it could wait. Now he fixed it carefully, as if small things mattered again. From time to time he glanced toward the house, wondering what Lena was doing, whether she was awake, whether she planned to leave today. The thought surprised him. He was not used to wondering about another person's plans. Inside, Lena sat near the window, watching him from a distance. She held a cup of warm water in both hands. Her body felt stronger, but her thoughts were restless. Staying in one place for too long had never been easy for her. Movement had always meant safety. Still, something about this place slowed her down. Something about Daniel made her feel seen without being examined. When Daniel came inside, she asked if there was anything else she could help with. He smiled faintly and said there was no rush today. They could take things slowly. That word stayed with her, slowly, Life had rarely allowed that. They spent the late morning walking the land together. Daniel showed her the far edges of the ranch, the places where the ground changed and the wind behaved differently. He talked about the land like it was a living thing, something to respect rather than control. Lena listened closely. Her people spoke of land in similar ways. That shared understanding surprised her. As they walked, Lena noticed how Daniel kept a careful distance, always aware of her space. He did not rush ahead or fall behind. He walked beside her, not leading, not following. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Eventually, they stopped near a dry tree that still offered shade. They sat on the ground, backs against the rough bark. The heat pressed down, heavy but familiar. For a long time, neither spoke. Words were not always needed. Then Lena broke the silence. She spoke of her past more openly than before. She talked about losing people she loved, about being treated as something temporary by those who passed through her life. She did not accuse. She simply stated facts, like someone listing the weather. But beneath her calm voice was a question she had carried for a long time. Daniel listened, his hands resting on his knees. He did not look away. When she paused, he said something simple. He said that no one deserved to be treated as something less than human. His voice held no anger, just certainty. That was when Lena looked at him differently. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to lower, the air shifted. The light softened and shadows grew longer. They returned to the house, both quieter than before. Something important had been spoken, even if it was not fully understood yet. That evening after dinner, they sat inside as the wind moved gently outside. Lena seemed restless. She stood, walked a few steps, then sat again. Daniel noticed but did not comment. He waited. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She told him that trust did not come easily to her. That safety for her had often been mixed with fear. She said that when people offered kindness, there was usually a cost. Daniel felt the weight of her words. He knew what it meant to guard oneself. He had done it for years. Then she asked him a question. It was quiet, almost careful. She asked if he would stay present even when someone was at their most vulnerable. She did not speak of actions or demands. She spoke of presence. Of staying. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Daniel did not answer right away. He felt fear rise in him, sharp and familiar. Not fear of her, but fear of himself. Fear of caring. Fear of loss. He had spent years building walls to protect himself from pain. This question asked him to step closer to the edge of those walls. He took a breath and spoke honestly. He said he could not promise things he did not understand yet, but he could promise respect. He could promise that he would not take advantage of trust. He said staying did not always mean possession. Sometimes it meant simply not turning away. Lena listened carefully. She searched his face, not for perfection, but for truth. She had learned to read people well. What she saw did not erase her fears, but it eased them. She nodded slowly. She said that was enough for now. The moment passed quietly, but both felt changed by it. It was not dramatic. There were no raised voices or sudden decisions. Just two people choosing honesty over comfort. That night, sleep did not come easily to either of them. Daniel lay awake, thinking about how close he had come to retreating into silence again. Lena lay awake too, feeling the familiar pull of leaving and the unfamiliar desire to stay. In the early hours of the morning, Lena got up and stepped outside. The sky was clear, filled with stars. Daniel heard the door and followed, keeping a respectful distance. They stood under the open sky, not touching but not apart either. Lena spoke softly, more to the night than to him. She said that staying somewhere meant risk. It meant allowing yourself to be known. Daniel replied just as softly. He said being alone was also a risk. It just felt safer because the pain was familiar. They stood there until the cold crept in. Then they went back inside, each to their own space. Nothing more needed to be said. As dawn approached, both knew that something had shifted. Not everything was clear. Not everything was settled. But a line had been crossed, not with steps but with understanding. The ranch, once a place of silence, now held questions, possibilities, and the fragile beginning of trust. And for both of them, that was more powerful than certainty. The days that followed felt different from anything either of them had known before. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no sudden promises, no big changes in routine. Yet something quiet had settled between them, something steady. It showed in small ways. In how Daniel asked if Lena needed rest before starting a task. In how Lena waited for him before walking the land. In how silence no longer felt like distance, but like shared space. Lena's strength returned slowly. Each morning she felt a little more balanced, a little more certain of her body. Still, she did not rush herself. She had learned that healing was not only physical. Some wounds needed patience, not pressure. Daniel noticed the change in her. He also noticed the change in himself. He slept a little longer. He ate with more care. He found himself fixing things he had ignored for years, not because they had to be fixed, but because he wanted them to be better. It was as if her presence had reminded him that the future was still allowed to exist. One afternoon, they worked near the old storage shed. The roof had been weak for a long time, and Daniel had planned to repair it but never found the reason. Lena handed him tools, careful not to strain herself. They worked quietly, moving around each other with ease. There was no awkwardness, no fear of stepping too close. Trust had begun to grow, not loudly but firmly. As they rested in the shade, Lena spoke again about her people. She shared stories passed down through generations. Stories about endurance, about respecting boundaries, about knowing when to stay and when to leave. Daniel listened closely. He did not treat her words as something exotic or distant. He treated them as truths shaped by time. He shared stories too, not just about loss, but about moments of joy he had almost forgotten, about laughter around a fire, about simple days that once felt ordinary. Saying these things out loud felt strange, like opening a door that had been shut for too long. But it also felt right. That evening, a visitor arrived unexpectedly. A man from the nearby town stopped by to discuss supplies. The moment was brief, but it changed the air. Lena noticed how the visitor looked at her with curiosity, how his questions carried assumptions. Daniel noticed it too. Without raising his voice or drawing attention, Daniel placed himself slightly between them. His words were polite but firm. He made it clear that Lena was a guest, deserving of respect. Nothing more needed to be said. After the visitor left, Lena sat quietly for a long time. Finally, she spoke. She said she had not expected that kind of protection. Not control, not ownership, just presence. Daniel replied that respect was not something that required permission. It was a choice. That night, Lena struggled with her thoughts. Part of her wanted to leave before things became complicated. She had learned that staying often led to disappointment. Yet another part of her felt tired of running, tired of never knowing what might have grown if she had waited. She spoke to Daniel about this openly. She told him she was afraid of staying too long, of wanting something she could not keep. Daniel did not try to convince her to stay. He told her she had the right to choose her path, that whatever she decided, he would respect it. That answer stayed with her. The next day, Lena took a long walk alone. She followed the edge of the land, letting the wind guide her thoughts. She thought about all the places she had passed through, all the people she had left behind. She realized that many of those goodbyes had happened not because she wanted to leave, but because she was afraid to stay. When she returned, Daniel was fixing a fence. She stood nearby, watching him work. Finally, she spoke. She said she would stay a little longer, not forever. Not with promises, just long enough to see what honesty could become. Daniel nodded. He did not smile widely or celebrate. He simply accepted her words as they were. That acceptance meant more to her than excitement ever could. In the days that followed, their connection deepened in quiet ways. They shared meals. They shared stories. Sometimes they shared nothing at all, just the comfort of being near without needing to explain themselves. Boundaries remained clear. Respect guided every interaction. This was not about filling loneliness. It was about recognizing humanity. One evening, as the sky darkened and the air cooled, they sat outside together. Lena spoke about vulnerability, about how being seen often felt like standing without armor. Daniel admitted that he had hidden behind silence for years because it felt safer than risking pain again. They did not try to solve each other's past. They simply allowed space for it to exist. As the fire burned low, Lena asked Daniel if he ever thought about what came next. He answered honestly. He said he used to believe there was no next, only repetition. But now he was not so sure. That answer did not promise anything, but it opened a door. That night, as they went to rest, both felt the weight of what they were building. It was fragile like glass, but clear and honest. Neither wanted to rush it. Neither wanted to break it. Outside, the land rested under the stars, holding their quiet progress without judgment. And for the first time in a long while, both felt that staying was not a trap, but a choice made freely, one day at a time. The last days of Lena's stay arrived quietly, without announcement. There was no clear moment when either of them realized it, but both felt it in small ways. In how Lena spent more time looking toward the road in the distance. In how Daniel paused longer before starting his morning work, as if trying to slow time itself. Nothing between them had changed, yet everything felt closer to a decision. Lena woke early one morning and packed her few belongings neatly. She did not rush. She folded each item carefully, giving herself time to think. Her body felt strong now. The ache that once slowed her steps had faded. Physically, she no longer needed shelter. What remained was the harder question of whether she wanted to leave. She stepped outside and found Daniel already awake, sitting on the porch as he often did. The sky was pale, caught between night and day. She sat beside him, leaving space as always. For a while they watched the land wake up. Lena spoke first. She said she would be leaving soon. Daniel felt the words settle deep in his chest. He had expected them, yet they still carried weight. He did not argue. He did not ask her to stay longer. He nodded slowly and thanked her for telling him. She looked at him, searching his face. She wanted to see disappointment or relief or something that would make leaving easier. What she saw instead was understanding. That made it harder. They spent that day together like any other. They worked, they rested, they shared a meal. But everything felt more meaningful, as if both were paying closer attention. Daniel noticed how Lena smiled when the animals responded to her voice. Lena noticed how Daniel spoke more freely now, how his silence no longer felt like a wall. In the afternoon, Lena asked if they could walk the land one last time. Daniel agreed. They walked slowly, following paths that had become familiar. Lena touched the fence posts, the dry grass, the rough bark of trees. She wanted to remember the feel of this place, not as a shelter but as a chapter of her life. They stopped near the edge of the ranch, where the land opened wide and the road stretched forward. Lena stood there for a long time, looking out. She spoke softly, saying that for much of her life she had believed staying meant losing herself. She said that here she had learned something different. That staying could also mean being respected. Daniel listened quietly. He told her that before she arrived, he believed connection always ended in pain. He said her presence had shown him that some connections did not need to last forever to be meaningful. They stood there, the wind moving gently around them. There was sadness, but no regret. That evening, Daniel prepared a simple meal just like the first night she arrived. They ate slowly, neither wanting the moment to end. When the dishes were done, they sat together near the door. Lena thanked him, not just for the roof or the food or the safety. She thanked him for seeing her as a whole person, for staying present without trying to own her choices. She said that kind of respect was rare, and she would carry it with her. Daniel told her she had given him something too. She had reminded him that his life was not finished, that his heart had not turned to stone. He said that because of her, the ranch no longer felt like a place where time stood still. That night, neither slept much. Lena lay awake, listening to the quiet. Daniel sat outside, watching the stars fade as morning approached. They were both thinking about the same thing, but neither felt the need to say it again. At sunrise, Lena stepped outside with her bag. Daniel stood nearby. There were no dramatic words, no promises made under the sky. They both knew better than that. Lena paused, then turned to face him. She said she did not know where her path would lead, but she knew it would be different because of this place. Daniel nodded. He told her the door would always be open, not as an invitation but as a truth. They shared a long look, full of everything they did not say. Then Lena turned and walked toward the road. Daniel watched until she was a small figure against the land, and then until she disappeared completely. The ranch felt quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Days passed. Daniel returned to his routine, but it no longer felt like survival. It felt like living. He repaired things with care. He visited the town more often. He spoke more, even if only a little. When loneliness came, it did not crush him the way it once had. It reminded him of connection, not absence. Sometimes in the evenings he thought of Lena. He wondered where she was, what she was doing. He hoped she was safe. He did not feel pain when he thought of her. He felt gratitude. Lena, walking her path, carried the ranch with her in quiet ways. When people questioned her worth, she remembered the calm respect she had been given. When she felt the urge to run, she remembered that staying could be a choice, not a weakness. Their lives moved forward, separate but changed. The story did not end with them together, but it did not end in loss either. It ended in growth, in two people meeting at the right moment, offering each other dignity instead of demands. And sometimes that is the most lasting kind of love there is.